Aloha, friends. It's so nice to see you all here today. So thank you for joining us for our first Wildlife Wednesdays lecture. We're very excited. Today's lecture is Solving the Hawaiian Bird Extinction Crisis through Invasive Species Removal and Climate Change Adaptation. My name is Catherine Bankston. I am the branch manager of the Principal Public Library on Kauai, which is one of the 51 libraries of the Hawaii State Public Library System. Wildlife Wednesdays is in celebration of Wildlife Refuge Week, and this series is made possible by a partnership between the Kauai National Wildlife Refuge Complex, Conservation Dogs of Hawaii, USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey, Pacific Rim Conservation, the Hawaii State Public Library System, and the Friends of Kauai Wildlife Refuges. So thank you for joining us. So as you saw on the slides, there is a Q&A option at the bottom of the screen. So that we can answer everyone's questions, feel free to submit questions and they will all be answered at the end of the webinar. So today I am happy to turn the mic over to Susan White. Susan is here to introduce Lindsay Young, who is the Executive Director of the Pacific Rim Conservation. Susan, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, aloha, and mahalo everybody for joining us for the kickoff of Wildlife Wednesday lectures. My name is Susan White, and I am the Deputy Supervisor for the Pacific Islands Refuge and Monuments Office of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It is my pleasure to introduce the first presenter for the first Wildlife Wednesdays lecture series. This is an amazing and unique way to celebrate National Wildlife Refuge Week and the partnerships that make the National Wildlife Refuge System shine. Before I introduce today's presenter, though, I'd like to briefly share a little bit about why America celebrates National Wildlife Refuge Week and what makes the National Wildlife Refuge System so special. National Wildlife Refuge Week is observed the second full week in October each year. And we celebrate the great network of lands and waters that conserve and protect America's precious wildlife heritage. Founded by President Theodore Roosevelt in 1903, National Wildlife Refuges offer access to a host of popular activities while providing really vital habitat for thousands of wildlife species. The National Wildlife Refuge System lands and water serve a purpose that's distinct from other U.S. public lands. And that's one of wildlife conservation that drives everything on units of the refuge system, from the purposes for which refuges are established, to the recreational activities that are offered, to the perpetuation of indigenous cultural activities, to the scientifically sound management tools refuges deploy for addressing the biological challenges. Now, the refuge system protects some of the country's most iconic ecosystems while also offering outstanding recreation for nearly 60 million people at its 567 wildlife refuges, 7 national monuments, and 38 wetland management units from Maine to the Mariana Islands. The service's management responsibilities in the Pacific Islands first date back to 1909, when President Teddy Roosevelt established the Hawaiian Islands National Wildlife Refuge in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. Today, refuge units throughout the Pacific Islands include 22 national wildlife refuges and the 4 marine national monuments. Today, I'm happy to introduce a crucial partner of ours, leading a number of projects across the Pacific, including at Midway Atoll, James Campbell, and Kilauea Point National Wildlife Refuges. Lindsay Young is a passionate biologist and cherished colleague. In 2018, I had the privilege of joining Lindsay and other experts from Pacific Rim on the first translocation of black-footed albatross from refuge islands in Papahanaumokuakea to James Campbell Refuge on Oahu. What an inspiring expedition. The mission, like so many for Pacific Rim, is truly solution-oriented, trying to find ways to enhance resiliency for Pacific wildlife in the face of a changing global climate. We're all in for a treat to hear firsthand stories from Lindsay about the inspiring work going on. So thanks to the partnership for organizing this series and to all of you for joining us. Now, Lindsay, the virtual floor is yours.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming today. And in true Zoom fashion, my PowerPoint has decided to temporarily pop. Oh, no, wait, here we go. Thank you for having me today. It's an honor to be here. And I have worked with the National Wildlife Refuge System since 2004. So it's been going on for quite a long time. And I'm pleased to present some of the work that we have been doing. And so I apologize, I'm trying to get my screen up here. Here we go. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking to you about solving the Hawaiian bird extinction crisis. And I just want to double check that you guys can see the full screen. If someone on the panel can maybe give me a thumbs up in your video, if you can see everything, including all the words in the title. Just want to make sure we're not having any technical issues. Okay, so I tend to talk really quickly. I'm going to be going through a lot of material, covering a lot of different species. So if you have a question, definitely write it down and we'll address everything at the end. But this is going to span the realm from forest birds to seabirds and all the different threats that they face and what we're doing about it. So as Susan said, we're a nonprofit organization. We exist to help prevent and reverse the extinctions of Hawaiian bird species and those across the Pacific. So we do this in partnership with state, with federal, with private landowners, always with the bird's best interests at heart. And there's a variety of ways that we do this. So let's get going and introduce you to our Hawaiian birds. So this is a picture of the adaptive radiation of Hawaiian honey creepers. So from one common ancestor, which you can see in this little gray picture in the middle, radiated dozens of unique species. And it's often said that if Charles Darwin came to the Hawaiian Islands instead of the Galapagos, the theory of evolution would have been hatched here in Hawaii. We have the world's most spectacular examples of adaptive radiation anywhere on Earth. This is as a result of our extreme isolation and the fact that very few things actually got here. And so once they did, they were able to fill what we call these vacant niches. Think of niches as being the place in an ecosystem where an animal sort of makes its living, whether it's reproducing or eating. Unfortunately, our birds are not doing well. The same thing that makes them incredibly unique also makes them incredibly vulnerable. So islands with endemic birds host disproportionately high numbers of extinctions, and Hawaii, unfortunately, is also the extinction capital of the world. So you can see that 42% of our endemic bird species went extinct upon the arrival of people to the islands. Once Europeans got here, which is 1778, that's the significance of that date, an additional 29% went extinct. So today we're left with 29% of all birds that ever evolved in the Hawaiian Islands. And of those, 2 of the 29%, so basically approximately 10% of our bird species are actually doing well at this point. In short, they are in dire need. And so a paper that was put out in 2008, which is now a long time ago, though it kind of seems like yesterday, sought to understand why are our birds doing so poorly. So we have less than 1% of the land area, less than 1% of the population in the country, and yet we have 1/3 of the endangered bird species. And despite this, we only get about 1% of the funding. And so we are an island state in a continental nation. We often compare ourselves to New Zealand, which is an island nation. And as such, they have top-down laws that help to regulate the conservation and prevent the extinction of species. The US, we are not so lucky. And unfortunately, out of sight means sort of out of mind with respect to Hawaii. So there's a very, very high need here and a very, very small proportion of funding that goes towards these things. So what are the threats? Why are things not doing well in Hawaii? The number one threat today, basically are non-native predators. So our birds did not evolve with any sort of mammalian predators. Anything furry is not supposed to be in Hawaii, with the exception of a bat. So cats, dogs, mongooses, all of those things, when they come in, they devastate the wildlife here. The top photo on the right-hand side is a pile of over 100 dead wedge-tailed shearwaters. That is from a single dog. Bottom right is a cat eating the Laysan Albatross. So on top of non-native predators, all of which will eat and kill our birds, we have habitat degradation. So you can see here in this photograph, this is Pu'u'ui on the Kohala Mountain Range on the Big Island of Hawaii. And you can see degraded habitat. This is ranch land being grazed or browsed by ungulates, by cows and pigs and sheep, and then the intact forest. And the only thing separating those two things is a simple fence. And so being able to prevent habitat degradation goes a long way towards maintaining the habitat. The other two items specific to birds are the interactions between climate change and introduced disease. So climate change takes the form of rising temperatures. That can cause sea level rise, which we'll get into specifically a little later on, and then can also exacerbate the impacts of non-native diseases on birds, which we'll talk about later too. So those are the threats. And so this slide, this is one of the only graphs you're going to see in those many pictures, to me is actually a really good news slide. So in 2009, January 1st, the very first day of the year ended, or the year started pretty bad and then ended even worse with COVID, but it started with the extinction of one of our endemic land snails in Hawaii. And the snail was named George after the Galapagos tortoise that was the last of his species. And he went extinct on the first day of the year. And so a group of us got together with Melissa Price leading this at UH, and all of the experts in different taxonomic groups, so invertebrates, basically the bugs, the insects, the botanists who study the plants, and then the vertebrates, which are basically birds in Hawaii. She got together and said, okay, what's the problem and do we know what to do? And this is where I think there's actually a lot of good news. So if you look on the left, you can see that for the bugs, the plants, and the birds, there are very few unknown threats. And so that to me is actually really good news. We know what the problems are because that's actually the first step towards identifying how you do a solution. And then if you look over on the right-hand side, you see what are the action status? What do we need to do in order to combat this? So do we know what it is? Is there technology needed or is it unknown? And again, very few orange, very few unknowns. The vast majority of things, we actually know exactly what to do. And in a few cases, we have to develop the technology, but for the most part, we know what we need to do to save these things. So what are those things and how can we do them? The first thing I want to talk about is protecting birds through predator control. So there's two ways to do this. One, you protect them in situ, in their habitat. So what you're looking at here is the Oahu Elapaio. This is one of our endemic forest birds. We have three Elapaio species on Kauai, Oahu, and the Big Island. And the co-founder of Pacific Rim Conservation, Eric Vanderwerf, did his PhD on these cute little guys. And what he found when he started in the early 90s was that rat control made a huge difference. So he did an experiment for all of 1 year, you can see. And in areas where there was no rodent control, there were 0.2 essentially fledglings per pair. Basically, only one pair in 5 could produce a chick. And what this means is that's a declining population. Replacement value where your population is stable is 1. Anything above 1 means your population is growing. So without rat control, these guys are going way, way down. What you can see is when he did rat control, that it hovered right at about 1, and in some cases 1 above it. And this was shown in the graph. So in a map. This to me is a really neat map. So if you look at 1975, which is the all white, you can see Oahu Elapaio were all throughout. This is the Ko'olau mountain range on Oahu, as well as the Waianae mountain range. And in the 1990s, the crosshatched one, they shrunk quite a bit. So now just left in these sort of southern ranges. But after doing 20 years of predator control, and they're surveyed again in 2012, they actually expanded. So predator control was actually really quite simple. It required manual labor, but controlling rats through snap traps or through poison. And that is the difference between extinction and not extinction for this species. They would be extinct today if this predator control had not been initiated in the 1990s. But what we call these guys is conservation reliant. So the second we stop doing predator control, that graph goes down, those birds decrease their range. So what about predator eradication? If you're controlling predators and things are going well, what about if you get rid of them? So there's kind of 2 ways to do this. So one is on an offshore island like this. This is Mokuauia off the very northeast coast of Oahu, or Goat Island. Sorry for all the clanging noise. My dog is scratching her collar in the background. And we eradicated rats from this island in, I believe, 2007. And as a result of that, wedge-tailed shearwater reproductive success went up. On mainland sites where you can't say get rid of all the rats on Oahu or Kauai, although I would argue that we can do that, we just need to learn how to scale these things up, there's predator exclusion fencing. So these are fences that are high enough that things can't jump over, they've got a rolled hood so they can't climb, and then a really, really fine chain link mesh so things can't squeeze through, and then a skirt that's buried just underground so that they can't actually climb either. So I'm going to go through the first fence that was done in Hawaii in 2011 at Kaena Point on the very northwestern tip of Oahu. And this fenced enclosed 59 acres of habitat for wedge-tailed shearwaters and Laysan Albatross, as well as 11 endangered plant species. And so the predators that were in this area were cats, dogs, mongoose, and rats. And so cats and dogs, it's pretty easy to figure out how those are going to kill seabirds. But the things that were most kind of insidious on an ecosystem level were the rats. So they'll not only, eat the eggs and chicks, as well as adults of seabirds, but also the seeds. They'll prevent reproduction from plants. These are sandalwood seeds that have been gnawed by rats. So when we put this fence up, we saw a huge increase. So shearwaters started nesting there in 1994. When predator control started in about 2000, they started going up. And the predators were eradicated right here. And you can see the first year, the number of birds doubled. Second year, they doubled after that. And they've almost doubled since then as well. And this maintains to this day. So it's not just that there's more birds coming back to the site. This wasn't just as a result of immigration. This is a higher proportion of nests were actually fledgling a chick. So the eradication made a huge difference in expanding the population. So seabirds' responses to rats, you can double their reproductive output after rodent removal. And you can see here, this is on one of our trail cameras, nice big black rat, wedge-tailed shearwater, just chilling there, no idea what's going on. They just really have no fear. Makes them great to study as humans, not so much from a predation standpoint. So rats can kill up to 50% of ground nesting birds in a single year, and it has really dire consequences, especially for some of our endemic, really threatened species like mule shearwater and Hawaiian petrel. Okay, so a lot of the work that we have done has been partnering with national wildlife refuges. And since we're talking about Refuge Week, I want to highlight some of those projects. So the three that I'm going to be talking about are Honouliuli National Wildlife Refuge on Oahu. This is a wetland that's seen down here. James Campbell National Wildlife Refuge, which is more of a coastal dune, and then Kilauea Point, which I'm sure most of you on Kauai are familiar with. So in 2018, we helped Honouliuli build a predator exclusion fence around the refuge here. And Melissa Price, one of her grad students, went in and decided to measure, so how do the water birds respond to this? We had an idea of how seabirds responded. Well, water birds, it was even stronger. So seabirds typically lay one egg in a clutch, and if their egg is gone in a year, that's it, they don't nest again. Water birds, however, have multiple egg clutches. They can lay 2, 3, sometimes even more eggs, and they can relay if their nest failed. And so what they found is not only was reproductive success higher, but the birds actually laid more eggs. So it's been found that in some mainland species, if a bird is fearful of something, if it has predators around, it won't produce as many offspring. So that fear that it's going to get eaten means it suppresses how many it produces in the first place, let alone anything that gets eaten after the fact. So the combination of these Hawaiian stilts laying an additional egg, as well as their increased reproductive success, and they have 3 times the reproductive success. So the predator eradication here really worked spectacularly well. So eradication versus control. Eradicating things can be really, really tough. You got to make sure they don't get back in, but potentially comparable in cost over time because you don't have to do sustained predator control. And it achieves a biological outcome that is impossible in predator control scenarios. So it's kind of like that old MasterCard commercial, like the price of, date night is $50, but the impact to mom and dad is priceless. Same sort of thing here. The cost might be something, but the biological outcome you get, the ability to generate more birds and to have a growing population, you really can't put a price tag on that. And for some of our species that are on the verge of extinction as a result of predation, this may very well be the only option they have. Okay, so what about in places where you can't actually fence it, you can't do great predator control, or you can't do an eradication? How do you actually get that done and then bring the birds back? So this is Kilauea Point National Wildlife Refuge on the north shore of Kauai. You can see the lighthouse right here. And this is the Mihoku Ecosystem Restoration Project. This is a predator exclusion fence that was built in an area of really highly degraded, super crappy habitat, but it was built with the idea that we make this really nice for the birds and we bring them back into that site. So the 2 species that were the target of this, well, mule shearwater and Hawaiian petrel are 2 endemic seabird species. And these 2 have declined by 94% for mule shearwater and about 76% for Hawaiian petrel in the last 20 years. So they are in what we call an extinction vortex. They're in kind of their last gasping breath, and they have a multitude of threats. Keep in mind, seabirds, as opposed to forest birds, have threats both on land and at sea. So whatever's going on in the ocean impacts them, and then whatever's going on land when they come back to breed also impacts them. The main threats for these guys were predation on their breeding grounds and then collision with structures as a result of light attraction. And so instead of listening to me talk for a minute, I have a short video that I'm going to show all of you on this project. Let me just 1 sec, I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare it to make sure that you guys can actually hear all of the audio here.
Seabirds are essential to the land and people of the Hawaiian Islands. Foraging across the Pacific, they bring vital nutrients from the sea to sustain the island's vibrant ecosystems. Hawaiian petrels are found only in Hawaii. They live at sea for years at a time, making landfall to nest on the island of Kauai. There, they raise chicks in burrows high in the mountains. Kauai was once a pristine paradise, but non-native predators and invasive plants now threaten the petrel's very existence. Today, seabird populations in Hawaii are a fragment of what they once were. Cats, rats, and pigs prey on the birds and their young, even in the remote mountaintops. But there's hope. Borrowing an approach from New Zealanders who've been battling invasive species on their islands for decades, Hawaiian conservation groups are on a quest to protect these nocturnal seabirds. In Kauai's rugged mountains, biologists closely monitor Hawaiian petrel nests. They identify 10 healthy chicks at just the right stage of development. Conservationists move these young petrels to a safe haven created just for them. With precious cargo on board, the pilot takes off. This is a tremendous step forward for Hawaiian petrels and for all of Hawaii's seabirds. The chicks' new home at Kilauea Point National Wildlife Refuge is protected by a fence designed to keep out predators. There, the chicks will be safe until they take flight. Artificial burrows will serve as their new home until they are strong enough to fly. Every day, caretakers feed the feisty chicks a blend of fish and squid and weigh them to monitor their growth. It can be a very messy job. By night, the chicks begin to stretch their wings. They explore their surroundings, memorizing the details of this particular spot. Soon, the young birds take flight. They will live at sea for 3 or more years, traveling thousands of miles to look for food. When they're ready to breed, the birds will return to land. Memory and the stars in the night sky show them the way back to nest safely within the enclosure. With their return, they mark the beginning of a new colony and hope for their future.
Okay, so that project involved moving birds from the mountains to an area on the same island in order to create a safe area that was not vulnerable to predation. And so with seabirds, they imprint on the site where they were born when they see, in the case of the burrow nesting birds that you just saw, when they see the night sky for the first time, they use the stars and the combination of the scent of the area to come back. So if you take those birds from their burrow before they've seen the night sky, they'll come back to where you move them. So you can kind of use their biology to direct them to where you want to go. In the case of surface nesting birds like albatross, which I'm going to talk about next, at about 1 month of age, they imprint on their site. And so again, if you move the young birds before they imprint on their site, you can trick them into coming back to where you want to go. With both of these species, the adults do not help them learn how to forage or find food at sea. So once they leave the nest, they do that on their own. They know how to fish. It's just instinctual. And we feed them until they are old enough to fly away. So just rest assured that we're not chick-napping these guys and just letting them fend for themselves. They're cared for until then. So what about birds that are vulnerable to not only predators, but sea level rise? So our organization has an initiative called the No Net Loss Initiative. And the goal is to match acre for acre what is currently being lost to sea level rise in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And we do this by creating these predator exclusion areas or mainland islands and then translocating or attracting birds into the area. So the one thing I want to talk about is there's endangered species listing, which is ESA, which is the US's designation for whether something's endangered or threatened, and then the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And what you should notice here is that there's a high proportion of species that are really vulnerable to extinction that are not recognized by the US system. And part of that is future threats of climate change are not currently included in how we evaluate those species. And so what we did as an organization was prioritize species that had a high proportion of their population under US jurisdiction. So where we were responsible for the vast majority of the species, and where most of those populations, i.e. 95% or more, were nesting at 2 meters or below in sea level. And so what we found was that these four, Laysan Black-Footed Albatross, Bonin Petrel, and Tristram Storm Petrel, were highly vulnerable to inundation from storm surge, from sea level rise, all of these things. So Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument is part of the Hawaiian archipelago. We live on the very southeastern Hawaiian Islands right in here. These are the inhabited ones. This monument goes 1,500 miles to our northwest and includes all of these various atolls and islets that are one of the most important tropical seabird colonies in the world. So there are 21 nesting species and millions of individuals. So really the landmass, even though it's a tiny speck compared to the marine part of it, is critically important for these seabirds. And this is where we get our birds from to start the new colonies. So climate change, how is this going to impact seabirds? There's more frequent and intense storms. And so this is a picture of what it looks like on one of those atolls, which is basically at sea level when there's high waves. And it's pretty disconcerting because you can see the waves are taller than you are when you are on land. In 2011, there was a unique opportunity, and I say opportunity because it came out of a pretty catastrophic event, to sort of get a preview for what sea level rise was going to look like. So in January and February, there are these really high winter storms coinciding with really heavy rainfall. So the combination of flooding from both the top and the bottom of the atolls, the freshwater lens got saturated. And then there was the Japanese tsunami. And so this is what Eastern Island looked like before the tsunami. You can see albatrosses everywhere, and some areas underneath have burrow nesting birds. And this is what it looked like afterwards. And the reason why, obviously a tsunami is not caused by sea level rise, but the height of the tsunami mimicked what we expect sea level rise to be. So it was kind of like a precursor or a preview for what we can expect of things in the future. This is what happens when you get 11 inches of rain in a short period of time on these atolls. So if you have storm surge bringing waves in from the beach, you can also have fresh water coming in from underground and inundating the island that way. So Laysan Albatross sea level rise scenarios on Midway, what you can see is passive inundation on the left. It doesn't really take a lot of land. And think of passive inundation of you're filling a nice bathtub for yourself and your children have not come in yet. And the bath water is rising nice and slowly. And then your kids get in the bath and all hell breaks loose and it's wave-driven flooding because they're getting everything out of the bathroom. And that's the whole idea of there's various inputs into the system, and the chaos of having the wave-driven flooding means that more of the island is inundated of water, just like more of your bathroom is as soon as your kids get in there. In 2018, there was a hurricane that came through called Hurricane Malacca, and basically wiped East Island off of the map. So this is a small island of French Frigate Shoals, about 500 miles northwest of here. And this was home to 2,000 nesting black-footed albatross pairs, as well as 90% of the nesting ground for green sea turtles in Hawaii. So you can see these islands are incredibly vulnerable to just stochastic events, so random hurricanes coming through. So the idea behind this was we take the birds, the species that were most vulnerable, those 4 species we talked about, but also the nests that were most vulnerable. So we selectively took nests that were on the perimeter of the atoll here, You can see Susan making her cameo, looking super warm on Midway in that picture. And we took nests that were in danger of flooding out in that specific season. Chicks were packed into a pet carrier. And in the case of Midway Atoll, it was pretty nice. We got to go by plane. Sometimes not so nice, which is the ship-based method, and that can take up to 10 days of having the birds. This is one of their rare moments out on deck to get them a little bit of sunshine. On Kauai, we did this by helicopter, and on other islands, we've done it by small boat or by car. So basically any method of transportation, we have at this point moved birds everywhere. Once they're in their area, their release area where we're translocating them to, they're fed a mixture of fish, squid, Pedialyte, and fish oil. In case of albatross, once they get larger, we'll feed them full food, but for the most part, the birds are actually tube fed. This is to maximize the number of calories they receive, so we can put a high percentage of oil, and also to make it honestly not as enjoyable for them. We don't want them to imprint on humans and come back begging for food. And this way they don't associate us with the food quite as much. So these birds also have social attraction equipment, so decoys and sound broadcast of what adults of their species look like. And you can see some chicks pick their spot and they stay in that spot. And this particular bird, we named him Griffin. This is one from 2018. And Griffin last year was about 200 miles away from coming back to Oahu as one of our first returning chicks and was killed as bycatch in the longline fishery. So despite mitigating all of the terrestrial threats, all of the on-land threats we're talking about, there's still that marine component that these guys are vulnerable to. So over the last 6 years, we've moved just under 600 birds of 6 species, and 93% of them fledge. And fledge means leave the nest for the first time. A lot of these species in the wild have a fledging rate of as low as 20% for Tristram storm petrel, up to like 60%. So this is much better than they would do in the wild. And the one thing that we're most proud of is dual shearwater, which is the most endangered of all the species we work with. We have never lost, knock on wood, a bird there. So all of these birds have had really high fledging rates. All of them have been seen at the translocation site as adults, meaning they've returned to the site that we moved them to, which is what we wanted. And 2 of those species, Hawaiian petrel and Bonin petrel, are now actively breeding at the translocation site as adults. So now they become a self-sustaining colony. Once they return, we don't interfere with them. We allow them to do their natural breeding cycle. And that's the idea. As we direct them where to go, they build the colony from there. So in addition to this, we do social attractions. So the decoys and speakers broadcasting the calls. And there are more than 60 wedge-tailed shearwater nests at James Campbell now, 6 Laysan Albatross nests, and numerous species prospecting at Nihoku. At James Campbell in particular on Oahu, it went from having no nesting seabirds to having more than a quarter of all Hawaiian seabirds found either nesting or prospecting the area in 5 years. So it's really neat that you can essentially create a seabird colony from scratch using these methods. So these are some of our returning birds, and we know who they are because we put bands on everybody's legs. So we know that this is a bird that we banded. That was one of our chicks. These are wild birds that are coming in to check it out. Same thing with this guy here. You can see his leg band over there. And so the last slide I want to talk about, this does not impact seabirds so much as forest birds, is climate change. And so climate change increases the temperature on islands, and with that increases mosquito habitat. So what you're looking at here, from about sea level to 1,000 meters is really good mosquito habitat. The temperature is nice and warm, mosquitoes love it. From 1,000 to about 1,500 meters, there's not quite as many mosquitoes, but still enough. The reason why mosquitoes are what I'm focusing on is they transmit avian pox, which is basically smallpox for birds, and avian malaria, the same disease that humans get, just a bird version of it. And those are highly deadly for our native forest birds. So where there are mosquitoes that can transmit malaria, we basically don't have forest birds. The significance of this is above 1,500 meters, there are no mosquitoes. So for our forest birds, this is really kind of the sweet spot. It's between 1,500 meters and then the tree line or the top of the island. So the Big Island has the most forest birds left because it's the highest. There's the most habitat above 1,500 meters. Maui is a close second. Kauai, however, that area is rapidly shrinking. And so by 2100, there's going to be less than 100, or it's going to be a complete loss of all mosquito-free habitat on Kauai and less than 100 square kilometers for most species by 2100. So as that temperature increases, the mosquito line, as we call it, moves up the mountain. And the situation on Kauai is really quite dire. There are 2 to 3 species that are expected to go extinct on that island in the next 3 to 5 years. So not just at some distant point in the future, but 3 to 5 years. unless this mosquito issue is resolved. And so we didn't have non-native, or we didn't have mosquitoes. Prior to 1826, they came in as ship ballast, basically the water that ships retain. And from them, they were able to spread across the archipelago. And avian malaria was introduced somewhere in the early 20th century. So we need to fight the mosquito problem to urgently prevent the extinction for forest birds, and we need to fight the sea level rise issue, either by reinforcing islands or creating new islands, new safe places for our birds there. Okay, I'm not going to get into these, but the thing that I want to kind of end with is that, again, we know what the solutions are and we just need to implement them. We're working on reducing the barriers to implementation, which in some cases is political will, but in most cases is funding. Most of us know exactly what we need to do. We lack the funding to be able to do it at a scale that makes a meaningful difference for these species. So not all hope is lost. We know what we need to do. We just need to get on with doing it. And with that, I'd like to close with one of my favorite sayings. No task is too big when done together by all. These are truly collaborative projects that involve state, federal, and private agencies, all working together for the greater benefit of the species of our archipelago. And there's a wide range of partners that have been involved in the projects that I mentioned, let alone other ones that we work with. And there's more information on the project website that you can get below. And with that, I am happy to take any questions.
Right, thank you so much, Lindsay. So we do have our first question in, and it is, I noticed in a much earlier slide showing good results of predator control, chick numbers in some years dropped dramatically, even though nests were increasing. Do you know of any specific events that caused that difference in some years?
Yes, so with the wedge-tailed shearwaters specifically, they are highly vulnerable to El Nino and La Nina events, which occur every 3 to 7 years. So when the ocean rapidly warms or rapidly cools in any given year, that impacts their prey source. And so we might see a whole bunch of birds starting to nest, and then something happens and there's no food available, and all of a sudden a lot of those chicks die. So most of the variation in reproductive success of those birds when predators have been removed is due to oceanographic conditions. And not just that, but also wind. A lot of these birds use what's called dynamic soaring. They harness the energy from wind to reduce the energy they need to actually fly. And if there's no wind, they will just sit on the water and wait to come home until winds pick up. So if we have a summer that has, basically Kona winds the whole time, no wind going on, they might sit for a week or two and not come back to feed their chick. And by the time they do, that chick is dead. Okay, a question, something about being possible to eradicate rats. Can you say more about this? Yes. So rats have been eradicated from islands, I would say slightly smaller than Kauai or Oahu, but relatively comparable in size and complexity of topography. Not with the same level of population. So the number of humans in the mix kind of complicates things. But at this point, we do have the technology to be able to eradicate rodents using a variety of methods from islands this large. And if you think about the benefits to that, think of how much poison is essentially put on the landscape by businesses controlling rodents, by personal individuals, and how much damage rats do, both in terms of the disease. Leptospirosis is primarily spread through rat urine. All of our pets have to be vaccinated against it. It sickens lots of people. The human health benefit to eradicating rats would be huge. So that, I would say, is less of a technology and a little bit more of a political will and funding issue.
And we had a follow-up question come through the chat of how do storms and floods affect the species?
How do storms and floods? So when we have a lot of heavy rain, so flooding for surface nesting species can flat out just drown the chicks, or it can cause them to be really waterlogged. A lot of these species have really fluffy down that once it gets wet, it kind of gets all matted and they're not able to thermoregulate, which means to control the heat in their body. And so they can actually die of hyperthermia or hypothermia, depending on the location. So they can drown or they can die from exposure, basically.
All right, so we have another question that just came through the Q&A, and just a reminder, if anyone else has questions, on your screen, you'll see the Q&A button. If you click that, you can send your question in for Lindsay to answer. So this one is there a is there a connect to light pollution that may need to be addressed? I have seen some places that are not following guidelines.
Oh, okay. So if you notice an area specifically on Kauai where Newell shearwaters and Hawaiian petrels are, that is not following seabird safe lighting, I would say to contact the state of Hawaii. I will try and find the specific person that should be contacted, and they will go and take a look and do a lighting assessment to determine what can be done so that business or structure is in compliance. But that's something I would say send me an email. My email is up on the screen, and I will get that to you personally once I figure out who the appropriate person is. Ooh, eradicating mosquitoes. Okay, so there are multiple ways that you can eradicate mosquitoes. There is what's called a mosquito birth control method. If you think of something like a blood type, we all know that we each have a unique blood type, and that if you get a transfusion with a different type of blood, it's not going to go well, it will kill you. Mosquitoes have a type of bacteria called Wolbachia that live inside of them. And there are different species of Wolbachia, and it interacts much in the same way as blood types. So that if you have two mosquitoes that mate together, a male and a female that have different species of Wolbachia, the female will mate with the male, but it will not produce any offspring and she will not mate again. And so by introducing a bunch of males into an area that have a different Wolbachia bacteria type than the female population, you can essentially help to sterilize a lot of them. There's also modifying the mosquito genome. There are ways to do that so that we essentially eradicate them from islands. There's multiple ways right now that are being experimented on in order to get mosquitoes out, and not just for birds, mainly for human health as a malaria reduction mechanism in other countries. Okay, how can average citizens help in direct action ways? That is an excellent question. And I would say the number one thing that we're dealing with is a lack of funding, to be honest. Hawaii is out of sight, out of mind with respect to Washington, D.C. So writing a lot of folks, not just our state representatives, but folks within Washington in other districts to help raise awareness. And then at a local level, helping to support initiatives to get a lot of these things underway. So there is going to be mosquito eradication methods proposed in the near future, writing in letters of support, because oftentimes people that support things are just like, yep, that's great. You don't need anything else. But the people that oppose them are the ones that are really, really vocal about that. So reading up information and becoming an ambassador and helping the conservation folks to actually talk to individuals and help to educate and just spread the word on what's going on. Okay, after several years of translocating chicks, are you seeing return rate of chicks that you expected, hope for? If not, any ideas why they might not be returning? So yes, we do have adults breeding in the fenced area. We have most of our returnees coming from 2016 and 2017 for Hawaiian petrels. And we hope to, our first year was in 2015. We hope to have seen birds from that cohort, but we did not. And there are two reasons. One, we only translocated 10 in our first year just to make sure that we worked out the methods. It was a very small number. And that was also the strongest El Nino in 20 years. So that oceanographic effect, we think, is what happened to our first cohorts. We've not seen any from 2015, but from years onward, we've been seeing actually really good return rates. They just took longer than we expected to initially return, but they are here now. Okay, Recovering America's Wildlife Act. This act is going to be voted on in congressional committees. So folks are encouraging people to contact your reps. Kaya Kahele is a co-sponsor. And I'm wondering if the moderator can maybe put that out so that everyone.
And you're on the RAWA, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to send it through the chat.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any updates on the efforts to eradicate mosquitoes in Kokee? I believe they're moving forward with the permits at this moment, and there have been a lot of working group meetings in the last week. I'm not part of that working group, so I can't give you a definitive update. What I will say is later on today in the Natural Resources and Environmental Management Department at UH, Callie Crampton, who runs the Kauai Forest Bird Recovery Program, we're giving a joint talk. So it's basically starting with the talk that you just saw. So if you missed it, because I know I was talking quickly, it will be going on again today at 3 o'clock in the Natural Resources and Environmental Management Department. And Callie will be talking after that, and she will be giving an update on the mosquito issue.
All right, do we have any final questions as we wrap up? And let me just double check the chat. Oh, we did have one person ask if we could repeat the information about the mosquito update.
Yes, so there is a talk that's going on today. I'm actually not the most appropriate person to give that. And what I will do, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second and just try and get you guys the flyer or the information so that you can log into that seminar, because it is actually a public seminar. Hang on one second. Oh, it is not letting me do that. What I will do is try and send that over to Catherine, and maybe she can share with the attendees or include it at the very end.
Yes, I can do that. Thank you. All right, so let me just double check. We've answered all of our questions. We have. All right, so I just want to say mahalo to everyone for coming and supporting our Wildlife Wednesdays. We are going to be meeting again next Wednesday. We're very excited. If you'd like to sign up for our next webinar, you can go to librarieshawaii.org, and our events are posted on our events page. Next week, we'll be with Conservation Dogs of Hawaii protecting wildlife. It will be the same time and the same place. And I want to say a huge mahalo to Lindsay for being our first speaker for this wonderful series. And also to Susan for doing such a great introduction.
Okay, and I just found the login information. So if you look in the chat, you can copy down who's going to be speaking and the Zoom login info down there. And that starts at 3 o'clock today.
I'm going to give everyone a moment to copy and paste if they like to copy and paste from the chat. And let me see. All right. All right, so thank you so much, everyone, and we hope to see you for the rest of our series. And we hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone.